There is a promise most humans make very early in life, often without words and without conscious choice. It forms quietly, in moments of fear, confusion, or loss. The promise sounds something like this. If I can understand life well enough, if I can plan carefully, behave correctly, and control the outcomes, then I will be safe. This promise becomes the invisible foundation of how we live. We study harder not only to succeed, but to avoid failure. We love carefully not to deepen intimacy, but to prevent abandonment. We plan obsessively, not because planning is wise, but because uncertainty terrifies us. From the outside, control looks like responsibility, discipline, ambition, even love. From the inside, it is often fear wearing the mask of strength. Modern psychology explains this need for control as a survival mechanism. The human nervous system evolved to detect threats and predict danger. When we can anticipate what comes next, the brain relaxes. When we cannot, it activates alarms, anxiety, hypervigilance, rumination. Control, then, becomes a shortcut to calm. If I know what will happen, I feel safe. But Buddhism sees something deeper at work. The Buddha taught that suffering does not arise simply because life is painful, but because the mind clings to certainty, to permanence, to the idea that things should obey our efforts. This clinging, known as attachment, disguises itself as wisdom. It tells us, be careful, be prepared, don't let go. Yet beneath that voice is a quieter truth. We're not seeking control because life is dangerous. We are seeking control because we cannot accept that life is uncontrollable. As children, control begins as protection. A child learns quickly that the world can hurt. Adults leave. Promises break. Pain arrives without warning. In response, the mind starts building rules. If I behave, I won't be abandoned. If I succeed, I will be loved. If I am useful, I will belong. These rules feel rational. They feel necessary. And for a while, they even work. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, something shifts. Control stops being a tool and becomes an identity. We no longer use control, we become it. We become the one who must hold everything together. The one who cannot rest until every variable is managed. The one who feels responsible for outcomes far beyond human power. In psychology, this is often linked to early emotional insecurity. When safety was inconsistent, the mind learned to compensate through hypercontrol. Control becomes a way to regulate anxiety. It offers the illusion of mastery in a world that once felt overwhelming. But Buddhism would say this illusion comes at a cost. The more we try to control life, the more fragile we become. Why? Because control depends on conditions staying stable. And life, by its very nature, is unstable. Everything changes. Bodies age. Relationships shift. Careers collapse. Health fades. Plans unravel. No amount of intelligence, virtue, or effort can stop impermanence. Yet the controlling mind keeps insisting. If I try harder, this time will be different. This is where suffering quietly takes root. The Buddha described this as craving. Not only craving pleasure, but craving certainty. Craving that says, I need things to be a certain way for me to be okay. And the mind believes this completely. It believes happiness is conditional. It believes peace must be earned. It believes safety lies somewhere in the future, just beyond the next achievement or adjustment. Modern psychology echoes this insight in different language. Studies show that people with a high need for control often experience greater anxiety and burnout. Why? Because they tie their emotional well-being to outcomes they cannot guarantee. When life cooperates, they feel competent. When it does not, they feel like failures, not just disappointed, but fundamentally unsafe. This is the hidden tragedy of control. It makes our sense of self dependent on forces outside our control. We begin to measure our worth by results. We confuse predictability with peace. We mistake rigidity for strength. Yet none of this feels wrong while we are inside it. Control is seductive because it offers dignity. It allows us to believe we are being responsible adults, loving partners, capable leaders. It tells us we are preventing pain, not realizing that we are only postponing our encounter with it. Buddhism does not condemn this impulse. It understands it. The Buddha never taught that wanting safety was a flaw. He taught that mistaking control for safety was the misunderstanding. The mind believes it can build a fortress strong enough to keep suffering out. But suffering does not arrive because we fail to control life. It arrives because life is alive. What makes this realization so difficult is that control often works just well enough to keep us believing in it. We do succeed sometimes. We do prevent certain losses. We do shape aspects of our lives. And so the mind concludes, see, this is necessary. But beneath that success is constant tension. The controlling mind never rests. It scans for threats, even in calm moments. It rehearses conversations that haven't happened yet. It worries about futures that may never arrive. It struggles not only against pain, but against the possibility of pain. In Buddhist terms, this is suffering before suffering, a quiet, exhausting resistance to reality as it is. And here lies the promise we make to ourselves, the one that will eventually be broken. If I do everything right, life will reward me with certainty. Life never signed that contract. It allows effort, but not guarantees. It invites care, but not control. It responds to wisdom, but not demands. This is not cruelty, it is freedom. But we cannot see that yet. At this stage, control still feels like love. It feels like intelligence. It feels like survival. And so we tighten our grip, believing we are protecting ourselves. We do not yet understand that the grip itself is what will exhaust us. The Buddha taught that suffering begins not with loss, but with the refusal to accept loss as part of life. Psychology agrees. The more we resist uncertainty, the more anxious we become. Yet the mind clings because letting go feels like danger. It feels like irresponsibility. It feels like stepping into darkness without armor. So we promise ourselves again and again, just a little more control, and then I can relax. But relaxation never comes. And that is why life eventually will intervene, not to punish us, but to teach us what control never could. This is where the journey truly begins. Control rarely announces itself as domination. It enters quietly, disguised as care. It says, I just want what's best for you. It whispers, I worry because I love. It insists, if I don't manage this, everything could fall apart. And because love is one of the most sacred experiences we know, we rarely question anything that wears its face. In relationships, control often begins as protection. A parent watches closely, correcting every mistake, guiding every step, shielding a child from disappointment. A partner anticipates needs before they are spoken, organizes life down to the smallest detail, plans the future with precision. A leader takes responsibility for every outcome, believing that strength means never allowing chaos. From the outside, these people look devoted, reliable, loving. From the inside, however, something else is happening. Fear is quietly steering the wheel. Modern psychology recognizes this pattern clearly. When someone feels responsible for another person's emotional state, success, or safety, it often traces back to anxiety rather than love. The nervous system learns that closeness equals risk. If something goes wrong, it feels personal. If someone suffers, it feels like failure. So the mind intervenes. If I stay vigilant, I can prevent pain. If I guide every choice, I can protect us both. If I hold everything together, nothing will be lost. What begins as care slowly becomes control. In Buddhist teachings, this confusion is deeply human. Attachment does not always look like greed or obsession. Sometimes it looks like sacrifice. Sometimes it looks like devotion. Sometimes it looks like responsibility taken too far. The Buddha warned not against love, but against clinging, the subtle belief that we must possess, manage, or secure what we love in order to keep it. Clinging tells us that love requires certainty. But love, by its nature, exists in uncertainty. Consider how control shows up in intimate relationships. One partner worries constantly about the other's choices. They advise, remind, correct, and plan, not because they distrust the other person, but because they cannot tolerate the anxiety of not knowing what will happen. If their partner struggles, they feel it in their own body as panic. If things go wrong, they blame themselves for not intervening sooner. Over time, the relationship begins to feel heavy. One person feels watched, managed, subtly confined. The other feels exhausted, unappreciated, quietly resentful. Yet both believe they are acting out of love. Psychology calls this enmeshment, when emotional boundaries blur, and one person's inner stability depends on another's behavior. Buddhism would call it attachment, mistaken for compassion. True compassion, the Buddha taught, does not seek to control outcomes. It seeks to understand suffering without owning it. But this distinction is incredibly difficult to see when fear is involved. For parents, the illusion becomes even stronger. A parent's love is primal, instinctive, and fierce. The urge to protect is woven into biology. Yet when fear dominates, protection transforms into micromanagement. The child's mistakes become unbearable. Their independence feels dangerous. Their pain feels intolerable. The parent believes, if I don't control this, my child will suffer. What often goes unseen is the deeper belief. If my child suffers, I will not survive it. This is where psychology and Buddhism intersect profoundly. When we cannot tolerate our own emotional discomfort, we try to control the world that triggers it. We regulate others because we cannot regulate ourselves. Control, then, is not about power. It is about emotional survival. In Buddhism, this is the root misunderstanding. We believe that love means eliminating suffering. But the Buddha taught that suffering is an inherent part of existence. No amount of control can remove it. The attempt to do so only multiplies suffering, first for ourselves, then for those we love. Yet control continues because it feels meaningful. The controlling mind feels useful, needed, important. It gains identity from holding things together. Without control, it fears becoming irrelevant, powerless, or exposed. In modern psychology, this often links to early experiences where love was conditional. Perhaps affection was offered only when one performed well, behaved correctly, or met expectations. The child learned that love depended on managing outcomes. As an adult, they repeat this pattern unconsciously, trying to secure love by securing circumstances. If I do enough, I will be loved. If I prevent mistakes, I will not be abandoned. If everything goes right, I will finally be safe. Control becomes a language of love, learned too early, too painfully. But love spoken through control carries an unspoken message. I don't trust life to take care of you. And life feels that distrust. Buddhism teaches that everything we love is impermanent, not to make us detach coldly, but to help us love wisely. When we accept impermanence, we stop trying to freeze people in the forms that comfort us. We allow them to grow, change, struggle, and become. Control resists this truth. It tries to preserve what is familiar. It tries to protect us from grief by preventing change. But grief is not caused by change. It is caused by clinging to what must change. Psychological research supports this insight. Attempts to control others often increase anxiety, reduce intimacy, and lead to emotional burnout. The more we try to manage outcomes, the more helpless we feel when they inevitably escape us. And yet, letting go feels terrifying. To release control feels like neglect. It feels like carelessness. It feels like abandoning responsibility. The mind protests, if I don't control this, something bad will happen, and it will be my fault. This is the illusion. The Buddha never taught non-attachment as indifference. He taught it as clarity. Non-attachment means loving without demanding permanence, caring without gripping, supporting without owning outcomes. In psychological terms, this is emotional differentiation, the ability to stay connected without losing oneself to love without controlling, to care without collapsing when things go wrong. But for the controlling mind, this capacity has not yet developed. It equates love with vigilance. It believes constant effort is proof of devotion. And so it tightens its hold, convinced that loosening would be irresponsible. Over time, however, the cost becomes undeniable. Control drains joy from relationships. It replaces curiosity with monitoring, trust with management, presence with anticipation. Instead of meeting life as it unfolds, the controlling mind is always one step ahead, bracing for impact. This is not peace. It is a quiet war against uncertainty. Buddhism teaches that peace does not arise from securing outcomes, but from releasing the demand that outcomes guarantee our happiness. Psychology agrees. Emotional freedom comes not from eliminating risk, but from increasing our capacity to tolerate it. When control feels like love, it is often because love has not yet learned how to coexist with uncertainty. This chapter is not an accusation. It is an invitation to see clearly. If control lives in you, it is because fear once needed it. If you hold tightly, it is because letting go once felt unsafe. If you manage what you love, it is because loss once felt unbearable. But love does not ask to be controlled. It asks to be trusted. And slowly, often painfully, life will teach us the difference. Not by taking love away, but by showing us that control was never what kept love alive. It was what kept us afraid. The lesson is not learned here yet, but the cracks are beginning to form. There is a contract most people never remember signing. It is not written in ink. It is not spoken aloud. Yet it governs countless decisions, disappointments, and silent resentments. The contract says, if I do everything right, life will give me what I deserve. It sounds reasonable, fair, even moral. Work hard, and success will follow. Be kind, and love will remain. Make good choices, and pain will stay away. This belief becomes the moral logic of control. It tells us that outcomes are transactions, that effort earns safety, that virtue guarantees protection. Modern psychology calls this a just world belief, the assumption that the world is orderly, predictable, and fundamentally fair. It helps the mind feel secure. If good behavior leads to good results, then the future feels manageable. Misfortune becomes explainable. Suffering becomes avoidable. But Buddhism sees this belief as one of the deepest illusions of the human mind. Not because effort is meaningless, not because ethics are irrelevant, but because life does not operate on contracts. Life operates on causes and conditions, countless, interdependent, and often invisible. The silent contract begins forming early. A child watches adults praise effort and punish mistakes. They learn that approval is conditional. Love feels safer when earned. Slowly, unconsciously, the child internalizes the logic. If I do my part, the world will do its part. At first, this belief offers motivation. It gives structure to chaos. It creates a sense of agency in a world that often feels overwhelming. But over time, the contract becomes rigid. It stops being a guideline and becomes a demand. The mind starts keeping score. I sacrificed, so why did I lose? I was loyal, so why was I betrayed? I try my best, so why did it still fall apart? When life breaks the contract, confusion turns into anger. Sadness turns into bitterness. Pain becomes personal. Psychology recognizes this moment as a profound identity threat. When our core beliefs about fairness and control collapse, the nervous system reacts as if reality itself has betrayed us. People don't just grieve what they lost. They grieve the meaning system that once made sense of life. Buddhism would say something even more unsettling. Life did not break the contract. The contract never existed. This realization is not liberating at first. It is destabilizing, because the contract was doing important psychological work. It was holding fear at bay. It was offering the illusion of predictability. Without it, the mind feels exposed, like standing on open ground without armor. So the mind doubles down. Maybe I didn't try hard enough. Maybe I made one wrong choice. Maybe I missed a sign. This is where control tightens its grip. Instead of questioning the contract, we blame ourselves for failing it. Guilt replaces curiosity. Self-criticism replaces grief. The Buddha described this as craving for becoming, the desire to secure a particular identity, outcome, or version of life. We crave being the successful one, the loved one, the safe one. And when reality threatens that identity, we experience not just loss, but existential fear. Modern psychology mirrors this insight. Research shows that people who tie their self-worth to outcomes experience deeper distress when things go wrong. Their suffering is compounded by shame. Failure doesn't just hurt. It feels like proof of unworthiness. The silent contract feeds this pattern relentlessly. It tells us that suffering must have a cause we can control. And if we cannot find that cause, we invent one. If I had been smarter, if I had been more careful, if I had seen it coming. This mindset feels responsible, but it is actually violent toward the self. Buddhism offers a radically different view. It teaches that suffering arises not because we failed to control life, but because we expected life to be controllable. The expectation itself becomes the source of pain. Impermanence is not a punishment. Uncertainty is not a flaw. Loss is not a verdict on our worth. They are conditions of being alive. But the controlling mind resists this truth fiercely. Why? Because without the contract, the mind must face vulnerability directly. It must accept that safety is never guaranteed. That love does not come with insurance. That effort influences outcomes, but never commands them. This feels terrifying. So we continue negotiating with life. We bargain silently. If I endure this, will you spare me the next pain? We justify our suffering. This must be happening for a reason. We cling to meaning to avoid chaos. Meaning itself is not the problem. Buddhism does not reject meaning. It rejects the belief that meaning equals control. Life is meaningful, but not obedient. Psychologically, this distinction is crucial. People who release rigid expectations about fairness and certainty often develop greater emotional resilience. They suffer, but they do not collapse. They grieve, but they do not personalize reality. They adapt rather than obsess. Buddhism calls this wisdom. Wisdom is not knowing how life will unfold. It is knowing that it will not unfold according to our demands. The silent contract, however, keeps us locked in a moral struggle with reality. When things go well, we feel validated. When they don't, we feel cheated. This creates a constant undercurrent of tension. We are never simply living. We are evaluating. We are never simply loving. We are calculating risk. We are never simply present. We are preparing for loss. The Buddha taught that this mental posture is suffering itself. Not the events, but the resistance. Not the pain, but the insistence that pain should not exist. Modern psychology confirms this. Acceptance-based therapies show that suffering decreases not when pain disappears, but when resistance softens. When people stop arguing with reality, their nervous systems calm. Their minds regain flexibility. Their lives feel livable again. But acceptance feels like defeat to the controlling mind. It confuses acceptance with passivity, surrender with weakness, letting go with giving up. This misunderstanding keeps the contract alive long after it has begun to poison us. Eventually, though, life applies pressure. Not all at once, not cruelly, but persistently. A loss that cannot be explained. A failure that effort could not prevent. A pain that refuses to make sense. These moments are not accidents. They are invitations. Not invitations to despair, but invitations to wake up. The Buddha taught that awakening often begins when our strategies fail. When the mind exhausts itself trying to control what cannot be controlled. When suffering becomes too honest to rationalize. The silent contract cannot survive these moments. It cracks. And through that crack, something unexpected enters. Not chaos, but clarity. The realization that life was never asking us to guarantee outcomes. The realization that worth was never conditional. The realization that control was never the price of safety. This realization does not arrive gently. It arrives through disappointment, through heartbreak, through the slow, painful recognition that no amount of effort can secure permanence. But what follows, if we do not close ourselves again, is the beginning of freedom. Not yet peace, not yet trust, but honesty. The honesty to admit, I cannot control this. The honesty to grieve without blaming. The honesty to live without contracts. This chapter ends here, not with resolution, but with tension. Because the mind is not yet let go. It has only begun to see that the agreement it depended on was never signed by life. And soon, life will make sure we understand why. There is a moment that divides life into before and after. It does not announce itself dramatically. It does not arrive with clarity or warning. It often appears ordinary until it isn't. A phone call, a diagnosis, a betrayal uncovered too late, a job lost despite years of loyalty, a relationship that ends without explanation, a body that no longer obeys. This is the moment when control fails publicly, not privately, where we can hide the cracks and pretend we are still managing, but openly, where reality refuses to cooperate no matter how tightly we grip it. Psychology calls this a loss of perceived control. Buddhism calls it dukkha, revealing itself. Whatever the name, the experience feels the same. At first, the mind freezes. Time distorts. The world feels unreal, as if a thin layer of glass now separates us from life. Thoughts become fragmented. The body reacts before the intellect can catch up. Heart racing, chest tightening, breath shortening. This is not weakness. It is biology. The nervous system, trained for prediction and safety, suddenly loses its map. What believed was stable is gone. What trusted is unreliable. What planned for no longer exists. And so the alarm sounds. Modern psychology explains that when control collapses, the brain interprets it as a threat to survival. Even if the loss is emotional rather than physical, the reaction is primal. Cortisol floods the system. The body prepares to fight, flee, or freeze. But there is nowhere to run. There is nothing to fight. There is only the undeniable truth that something has slipped beyond reach. In this moment, suffering feels deeply personal. Why me? Why now? What did I do wrong? The mind scrambles to regain footing. It searches for causes, mistakes, warnings it missed. It believes that if it can just understand why this happened, it can restore control, or at least prevent it from happening again. Buddhism recognizes this reaction intimately. The Buddha taught that when suffering arises, the untrained mind immediately grasps for explanations. Not out of wisdom, but out of fear. Explanation feels like control's last refuge. But life does not always offer explanations that satisfy the ego. Sometimes there is no lesson neat enough to make the pain acceptable. No moral balance that makes the loss fair. No narrative that restores the old sense of order. This is when suffering intensifies. The pain itself is already difficult, but layered on top is resistance. The refusal to accept that something irreversible has occurred. The mind says, this should not be happening, and that sentence becomes a second wound. Psychology describes this as secondary suffering, the distress created not by the event itself, but by our reaction to it. Rumination, blame, anger, and denial amplify the original pain, keeping the nervous system in a prolonged state of threat. Buddhism has been saying this for over 2,000 years. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. Optional does not mean easy to avoid. It means that suffering is not inherent in pain. It is constructed by resistance. But in the moment everything slips, this distinction feels cruel. The mind does not want philosophy. It wants restoration. And so it fights. It fights reality with thoughts. It fights loss with memory. It fights uncertainty with obsession. We replay conversations endlessly, searching for a different outcome. We imagine alternate timelines where we said the right thing, noticed the warning signs, acted sooner. We believed that if we had been more vigilant, more intelligent, more disciplined, this would not have happened. Control turns inward and becomes self-punishment. This is where modern psychology and Buddhist insight converge powerfully. Both recognize that the urge to blame, whether others or ourselves, is an attempt to preserve the illusion that the world is controllable. If someone is at fault, then the universe is still orderly. If we are at fault, then next time we can do better. But sometimes there is no fault. There is only impermanence. The Buddha taught that everything conditioned must eventually change. Relationships end. Bodies age. Circumstances shift. What arises will pass. Not because we failed, but because change is the nature of existence. Yet when everything slips, this truth feels unbearable. Why? Because we were not just controlling outcomes. We were controlling identity. We believed we were the kind of person this would not happen to. We believed our effort insulated us from chaos. We believed our awareness protected us from collapse. And now that identity is threatened. Psychologically, this is devastating. The loss is not just external, it is existential. The story we told ourselves about who we are and how life works is fractured. This is why people often say, "I don't recognize myself anymore," after major loss. It is not only grief, it is disorientation. Buddhism names this moment clearly. The ego is exposed. The ego is not arrogance. It is the structure we use to feel stable in a changing world. When control works, the ego feels competent. When control fails, the ego feels humiliated, unsafe, and desperate to rebuild. So the mind clings harder. It makes vows. I will never let this happen again. It tightens rules. I must be more careful. It withdraws emotionally. I won't get attached. These responses feel protective, but they often deepen suffering. Psychology shows that after traumatic loss, excessive control strategies can lead to anxiety disorders, depression, and emotional numbness. The attempt to prevent future pain often shrinks life itself. Buddhism would say the same in different words. Clinging after loss is like gripping a burning coal. It does not prevent pain, it prolongs it. Yet no one releases control willingly at first. Control collapses only when it is forced to. This is why the moment everything slips is so important. It is not merely a tragedy, it is a confrontation. Life is confronting us with a truth we avoided when things were working. That effort does not equal immunity. That love does not guarantee permanence. That intelligence does not conquer impermanence. This confrontation feels brutal, but it is honest. The Buddha did not teach awakening as a reward for virtue. He taught it as a consequence of seeing clearly, often through suffering. When our strategies fail, we finally see their limits. The breaking point is not designed to destroy us. It is designed to stop us from living under an illusion. Psychologically, this is the beginning of post-traumatic growth, though it does not feel like growth yet. It feels like collapse. But within this collapse lies the first real possibility of freedom. Freedom from the exhausting project of trying to make life behave. Still, in this chapter, we are not free yet. We are angry. We are afraid. We are confused. We are still arguing with reality. And that argument is exhausting us. The moment everything slips does not bring wisdom immediately. It brings raw exposure. It strips away the belief that we were in control and leaves us face to face with uncertainty. This is the threshold. On one side lies the old life, built on contracts, vigilance, and control. On the other lies something unknown, unstructured, and terrifying. Most people try to run back, but life does not allow it. Once control breaks visibly, it cannot be repaired the same way. The mind may try, but it will never fully believe again. Doubt has entered, and where doubt enters, transformation becomes possible. Not because we choose it, but because life has chosen honesty over comfort. The real struggle is only beginning. After the moment everything slips, something even more exhausting begins. An invisible law. It does not happen in the outside world. It happens entirely within the mind. And unlike external crises, This battle has no clear enemy, no clear strategy, and no clear end. On one side stands reality, unchangeable, indifferent, already happened. On the other side stands a mind, furious, frightened, and refusing to accept what is. This is the inner war. Psychology describes this state as psychological resistance. Buddhism names it more simply, fighting what is. At first, resistance feels justified, even noble. After all, should we not fight injustice? Should we not resist loss? Should we not try to undo what hurts us? But this is not a fight for change. It is a fight against acceptance. The mind repeats a single sentence endlessly, though often in different forms. This should not be happening, and every repetition tightens the knot of suffering. Modern psychology explains that when the brain perceives an event as unacceptable, it keeps the nervous system in a state of emergency. Stress hormones remain elevated. Sleep is disrupted. The body never fully relaxes because it believes the danger is still present, even when the event has already passed. The body is living in the present. The mind is trapped in an argument with the past. Buddhism saw this long before neuroscience could measure it. The Buddha taught that suffering arises not from pain itself, but from craving reality to be different than it is. This craving does not always want pleasure. Often it simply wants things to go back. But life does not move backward, so the mind turns inward. It replays conversations obsessively. It rewrites memories. It imagines alternate endings. Each replay feels like problem solving, but in truth, it is self-torture disguised as intelligence. Psychology calls this rumination. Buddhism would call it attachment to thought. Thoughts begin to feel urgent, authoritative, absolute. If only I had noticed sooner. If only I had said something different. If only I had trusted my instincts. These thoughts do not heal. They inflame. Yet the mind clings to them because letting go feels like surrendering to helplessness. This is the paradox of the inner war. The mind fights because it believes fighting will protect it from pain. But the fight itself becomes the source of exhaustion. In Buddhist terms, this is where suffering multiplies. There's the original pain, the loss, the betrayal, the failure. Then there is the second layer, the refusal to accept it. Then the third, the judgment of oneself for feeling weak, angry, or broken. By the time we reach this stage, the original event is no longer the main problem. The problem is the war. Psychology confirms this clearly. People often report that the most painful part of trauma is not the event itself, but the endless mental struggle afterward, the inability to rest, the sense of being trapped inside one's own thoughts. The nervous system never receives the signal that the danger has passed, because the mind keeps saying this cannot be allowed. Buddhism does not ask us to approve of pain. It asks us to stop arguing with its existence. This distinction is crucial. Acceptance does not mean liking what happened. It does not mean excusing harm. It does not mean becoming passive. Acceptance means recognizing that what has already happened cannot be unhappened. The inner war begins when we confuse acceptance with defeat. The mind fears that if it accepts reality, it will lose its leverage. It believes resistance is the last form of control it has left. So it holds on to anger, blame, and resentment as proof that something was wrong. But anger does not undo loss. Blame does not restore control. Resentment does not heal wounds. They only keep the body tense and the heart closed. Psychology shows that prolonged resistance often leads to emotional numbness. When a nervous system cannot resolve the threat, it shuts down. People stop feeling, not because they are healed, but because feeling has become unbearable. Buddhism calls this aversion. The mind pushes away experience to survive. But what is pushed away does not disappear. It waits. This is why the inner war feels endless. We are fighting something that is not fighting back. Reality is silent. It does not justify itself. It does not explain. It does not apologize. And this silence enrages the mind. The Buddha taught that silence is not cruelty. It is truth. Life does not negotiate with preferences. It unfolds according to causes and conditions, not personal agreements. Psychology aligns here again. Control-oriented minds struggle most during loss because they were taught, implicitly or explicitly, that effort equals outcome. When this equation fails, the mind does not know how to exist without rules. So it invents new ones. I must stay angry so this never happens again. I must stay alert so I am never surprised again. I must stay guarded so I'm never hurt again. These rules feel protective, but they keep us trapped. The inner war does not end through victory. It ends through exhaustion. Eventually, the mind grows tired of fighting what cannot be changed. The body begins to ache from constant tension. Sleep becomes shallow. Joy feels distant. The cost of resistance becomes impossible to ignore. This is not failure. This is the turning point. Buddhism teaches that wisdom often arises not from strength, but from fatigue. When the mind finally admits, I cannot keep doing this, a small opening appears. Psychology calls this distress tolerance. Buddhism calls it equanimity beginning to form. In this opening, something subtle happens. The mind pauses, not because it has solved the problem, but because it has run out of energy to fight it. For the first time, reality is allowed to be what it is, if only for a moment. This moment is fragile. It does not feel peaceful yet. It feels exposed, but it is honest. The Buddha taught that suffering begins to end when resistance softens. Not when pain disappears, but when the mind stops demanding that pain should not exist. In psychological terms, the nervous system finally receives a new signal. The danger is not ongoing. This allows the body to exhale. Not fully, not easily, but enough to survive. The inner war does not end dramatically. There is no victory parade. No sudden enlightenment. There is only a quiet realization. Fighting this is costing me my life. And slowly, reluctantly, the grip loosens. The mind does not yet trust life. It does not yet understand. It does not yet feel free. But it is no longer attacking reality. This is the first ceasefire. And in that ceasefire, something unexpected begins to emerge. Not relief, but space. Space to feel without fixing. Space to grieve without explanation. Space to exist without controlling. The war is not over, but the battle lines have shifted, and that is enough for now. At some point, often quietly, sometimes violently, the mind reaches a devastating realization. Control does not fail because we are careless. It fails because it was never designed to succeed. This truth is not immediately comforting. In fact, it can feel humiliating. The mind has invested years, sometimes a lifetime, into mastering strategies, building systems, refining vigilance. To discover that control was fundamentally limited feels like betrayal by one's own intelligence. Yet Buddhism would say this discovery is not a defeat. It is clarity. The Buddha taught that all conditioned things are impermanent. This is not a philosophical opinion. It is an observation of reality. Everything that arises does so because of causes and conditions. And when those conditions change, the thing must change as well. Control, however, assumes the opposite. It assumes stability. It assumes predictability. It assumes that with enough effort, variables can be fixed. Modern psychology explains why the mind clings to this assumption. The brain evolved to predict. Prediction reduces uncertainty. Uncertainty triggers anxiety. Control, therefore, becomes the mind's attempt to reduce uncertainty by freezing life into manageable patterns. But life is not a system that can be frozen. It is a process. This is where control quietly begins to fail, long before it collapses dramatically. Even when things seem stable, the controlling mind must work constantly to maintain that stability. It monitors, it plans, it anticipates threats, it adjusts endlessly. What looks like strength from the outside is often tension on the inside. Buddhism teaches that tension is the body's response to resistance. When we resist the natural flow of change, the body tightens. The mind narrows. Awareness contracts. Psychology confirms this. Chronic control is associated with heightened stress, reduced emotional flexibility, and increased vulnerability to anxiety and depression. The mind becomes brittle. When conditions shift, as they always do, the system breaks rather than bends. This is the paradox. The more we rely on control, the less resilient we become. Why? Because resilience does not come from preventing change. It comes from adapting to it. Control tries to dominate uncertainty. Wisdom learns to live with it. The Buddha used a simple metaphor, grasping. When the hand is clenched tightly, it cannot receive anything new. When the mind is clenched around outcomes, it cannot respond intelligently to what is actually happening. Control fails because it is rigid. It assumes one correct path. It clings to one desired outcome. It narrows attention to what should be happening. Life, on the other hand, is fluid. It moves sideways. It surprises. It rearranges priorities without permission. No amount of planning can anticipate every variable. No amount of vigilance can prevent loss. No amount of intelligence can outmaneuver impermanence. This is not pessimism. It is realism. Psychologically, the failure of control is often misunderstood as personal inadequacy. People believe they failed to manage life properly. Buddhism reframes this entirely. Life was never meant to be managed. It was meant to be met. When control fails, it exposes something deeply uncomfortable, our vulnerability. Control allowed us to believe we were protected. When it collapses, we are confronted with the truth that protection was always partial, temporary, and conditional. This realization feels frightening at first, but beneath the fear lies something else. Relief. Because maintaining the illusion of control is exhausting. Think of how much energy it takes to constantly monitor outcomes, to anticipate disappointment, to brace against uncertainty, to rehearse worst-case scenarios, to stay alert even in moments that should be restful. The Buddha taught that suffering is exhausting because it is effortful. It requires constant mental activity to resist reality. Psychology agrees. Chronic stress is not caused by events alone, but by prolonged cognitive effort, worry, rumination, hypervigilance. Control keeps the mind in a perpetual state of effort, and effort, sustained without rest, breaks us. This is why life does not gently convince us to let go of control. It exhausts us into surrender, not out of cruelty, but necessity. If control actually worked, if it truly delivered lasting safety, the mind would never abandon it. The illusion persists precisely because it works just enough to keep us believing. But eventually, the cost outweighs the benefit. Bodies burn out, relationships strain, joy fades. Control becomes a prison disguised as protection. Buddhism calls this dukkha, not just pain, but unsatisfactoriness. The feeling that no matter how much we do, something is always off. Something is always threatened. Something is always missing. Modern psychology describes the same phenomenon as chronic dissatisfaction. Even when external circumstances improve, the inner sense of unease remains. Why? Because the problem was never external. It was the belief that peace depends on control. The failure of control is not sudden. It is cumulative. Each small disappointment weakens the illusion. Each unpreventable loss cracks the belief. Each moment of exhaustion whispers the truth. And eventually, the mind can no longer deny it. I cannot hold everything together. I cannot guarantee outcomes. I cannot secure myself through effort alone. This is not a collapse into despair. It is a collapse into honesty. The Buddha taught that awakening begins when false refuges fail. Control is one of the most seductive false refuges because it mimics wisdom. It feels responsible. It feels adult. It feels necessary. But when it fails, it reveals something essential. Life was never asking us to dominate it. It was asking us to participate. Psychologically, this shift is profound. People who relinquish excessive control often report increased emotional flexibility, deeper relationships, and greater resilience. They still experience pain, but they recover faster. They adapt. They remain open. Buddhism would say they're no longer fighting impermanence. Control fails because impermanence always wins. But impermanence is not the enemy. It is the teacher. It teaches us humility, not as humiliation, but as right-sized awareness. It reminds us that we are part of life, not its managers. Participants, not directors. This realization does not remove responsibility. It refines it. We are responsible for our actions, not outcomes. We are responsible for our intentions, not guarantees. We are responsible for showing up, not securing permanence. The failure of control clears the way for a different kind of strength. Not the strength of domination, but the strength of adaptability. Not the strength of certainty, but the strength of presence. The Buddha called this right understanding. Psychology calls it psychological flexibility. Different languages, same truth. When control finally fails, and it always does, it leaves behind a choice. We can cling harder, growing more rigid, bitter, and exhausted. Or we can begin to ask a different question. Not, how do I make life behave? But how do I meet life as it is? This question marks the end of one way of living and the beginning of another. Control fails not to punish us. It fails to free us from the belief that we were ever meant to be in control at all. When control finally fails, not temporarily, but completely, something far more unsettling happens. The self begins to collapse. Not the body, not the personality, but the identity we built to survive. For most of our lives, we do not experience ourselves as raw awareness. We experience ourselves as roles, stories, and functions. We are the responsible one, the strong one, the planner, the fixer, the one who holds everything together. Control was not just a strategy. It was who we thought we were. So when control no longer works, the question arises, not loudly, but with quiet terror. If I'm not in control, then who am I? Psychology recognizes this moment as an identity rupture. When the roles that once provided meaning and stability dissolve, the mind enters a state of profound disorientation. People often describe it as losing themselves or not recognizing who they are anymore. Buddhism describes it even more precisely. The Buddha taught that what we call self is not a fixed entity, but a collection of conditions, thoughts, emotions, memories, roles, constantly arising and passing away. This teaching, known as non-self, is not meant to deny experience. It is meant to free us from mistaking a strategy for an identity. But when the old self collapses, it does not feel freeing. It feels like falling. The collapse often follows loss. A relationship ends, a career dissolves, health fails, or a belief system shatters. The structure that once organized life disappears, and with it, the sense of being someone solid in the world. Suddenly, the familiar inner voice goes quiet. The one that said, I know what to do. The one that said, I can fix this. The one that said, I am capable. In its place is silence. Not peaceful silence, empty silence. Psychologically, this is terrifying because the ego, the organizing center of identity, has lost its job. It no longer knows how to maintain coherence. It cannot explain what happened, cannot guarantee what will happen next, and cannot restore the old sense of competence. So the mind panics. It tries to rebuild the old self as quickly as possible. Maybe I need a new goal. Maybe I need a new belief. Maybe I need to reinvent myself. This urge to rebuild is understandable. Identity feels like ground. Without it, we feel unanchored, exposed, and vulnerable to the vastness of life. But Buddhism teaches that this collapse is not a mistake. It is an unveiling. The old self was never as solid as it appeared. It was held together by effort, control, and constant reinforcement. When those supports disappear, the structure reveals its true nature, temporary, constructed, and fragile. This is why the collapse feels humiliating. We believed we were our competence. We believed we were our roles. We believed we were our ability to manage life. When these dissolve, we feel reduced, less important, less capable, less real. But Buddhism insists, what is collapsing is not your essence. It is your armor. Psychology supports this insight in its own way. Studies on post-traumatic growth show that after major identity disruption, people often emerge with a deeper sense of authenticity. But before that growth comes a period of profound confusion, what psychologists call identity diffusion. During this phase, nothing feels stable. Values feel uncertain. Motivation disappears. Confidence evaporates. People often describe this period as empty, numb, or lost. They may feel disconnected from passions they once had. Goals that once mattered now feel meaningless. This is not depression. It is deconstruction. The mind is losing a framework that no longer serves reality. Buddhism would say this is where the illusion of a permanent self finally cracks. Not through philosophy, but through experience. When life strips away roles, plans, and control, the question arises naturally. What remains when everything I relied on disappears? At first, the answer seems to be nothing, and that frightens us. We confuse the absence of identity with annihilation. We assume that if the old self is gone, we must be broken. But Buddhism teaches that emptiness is not absence. It is openness. The old self was narrow. It had rules. It had demands. It had conditions for worth. Without it, there is space. But space feels dangerous when we're used to walls. Psychologically, this stage is often accompanied by grief. Not only for what was lost externally, but for the version of ourselves that believed life could be controlled. We grieve the identity that promised safety through effort. This grief is rarely acknowledged. People are told to move on, be strong, or find yourself again. But Buddhism invites us to stay, to sit inside the collapse, to not rush toward reconstruction. Why? Because rebuilding too quickly recreates the same illusion under a different name. The Buddha warned against this impulse. He taught that when the mind grasps at a new identity too soon, it repeats the cycle of attachment. It replaces one form of control with another. The collapse of the old self is not meant to be fixed. It is meant to be witnessed. In this witnessing, something subtle begins to emerge. Without the pressure to be someone, we begin to notice awareness itself. The simple fact of being here, breathing, feeling, observing. This awareness does not panic. It does not demand certainty. It does not need a role to exist. Psychology calls this observing self, the part of consciousness that can notice thoughts and emotions without being consumed by them. Buddhism calls it mindfulness. This is not yet liberation, but it is the beginning of seeing clearly. The collapse of the old self creates a gap, a pause between who we were and who we might become. In this gap, we are deeply uncomfortable because the mind wants definition. But life is offering something rare, a chance to experience existence without a mask, without the role of controller, without the identity of fixer, without the pressure of being the one who knows. This feels humiliating to the ego, but it is deeply compassionate because the old self was tired. It was holding too much responsibility. It was carrying too many expectations. It was pretending to be something it was never meant to be. The Buddha taught that the self we defend so fiercely is also the self that suffers most. When that self collapses, suffering loses its primary target. There is still pain. There is still uncertainty. But there is less personal drama around it. This is why, paradoxically, people often report moments of unexpected calm during deep identity collapse. Not peace, but relief. Relief from pretending. Relief from performing. Relief from controlling. The collapse is not clean or linear. Some days the old self resurfaces, demanding to be rebuilt. Other days, emptiness feels overwhelming. But slowly something shifts. We stop asking, how do I become who I was? And begin asking, what is here now without effort? This question marks a profound turning point. The old self does not need to be destroyed. It only needs to be seen for what it was, a survival strategy, not a truth. Life did not break us to erase us. It broke the illusion of who we thought we had to be. And in the space left behind, something quieter, more real, begins to breathe. After the old self collapses, the mind looks for something familiar to grab onto. A solution, a plan, a way forward. But there is nothing to fix yet. And this is where the deepest discomfort begins. We are conditioned to believe that every pain has a remedy, every problem a solution, every breakdown a strategy for recovery. From childhood, we are taught to act, improve, resolve. Stillness feels like failure. Inaction feels irresponsible. So when life presents us with pain that cannot be solved, the mind panics. What do I do now? Buddhism's answer is both radical and unsettling. You sit, not to escape, not to numb, not to wait for clarity. You sit to be with what is. Modern psychology has only recently begun to understand the power of this practice. For decades, healing was framed as fixing, changing thoughts, altering behavior, correcting emotions. While these tools have value, they often fail when pain is existential rather than situational. Some wounds do not need solutions. They need presence. Psychologists call this distress tolerance, the capacity to remain with difficult internal states without trying to eliminate them. Buddhism calls it mindfulness. At first, sitting with pain feels impossible. The body is restless. The mind races. Emotions surge unpredictably. There's an almost compulsive urge to do something, anything, to make the discomfort stop. We distract ourselves, intellectualize, spiritualize, or numb. We tell ourselves stories about growth, lessons, and silver linings, hoping meaning will anesthetize the ache. But these strategies are still forms of control. They are attempts to fix what life has not yet finished revealing. The Buddha taught that when suffering arises, the instinct to escape, it is what deepens it. Not because escape is wrong, but because it prevents understanding. Pain that is avoided does not dissolve. It hides. Psychology confirms this. Suppressed emotions do not disappear. They resurface as anxiety, depression, or physical illness. Healing begins not when pain is eliminated, but when it is allowed. So, sitting becomes an act of courage. Not passive courage, but embodied courage. To sit with pain is to stay present while the nervous system screams for relief. It is to let sensations rise and fall without commentary. To allow grief to move through the body without explaining it. This is profoundly countercultural. We are taught to fix emotions quickly, especially uncomfortable ones. But Buddhism invites us to experience emotions as temporary visitors, not problems to be solved. This does not mean indulging suffering. It means meeting it honestly. When we stop trying to fix pain, something unexpected happens. The pain begins to change, not because we forced it to, but because all experiences are impermanent. At first, the pain may intensify. This often frightens people and drives them back into distraction. But intensity is not danger. It is expression. The body is finally allowed to speak without interruption. Psychologically, this is the nervous system completing a stress cycle. When emotions are felt fully without resistance, the body gradually returns to equilibrium. Buddhism has always known this. The Buddha taught that sensations arise, peak, and pass if we do not cling to them or push them away. The mind's interference is what freezes experience into suffering. But sitting with what cannot be fixed also reveals something deeper. It reveals how much of our suffering came from the belief that we should not be suffering. When we sit without fixing, we confront the raw fact of pain without moral judgment. Pain is no longer evidence of failure. It is simply an experience occurring in awareness. This shift is subtle but profound. Psychology refers to this as decentering, the ability to observe thoughts and emotions without identifying with them. Buddhism calls it non-attachment. In this space, the story of me begins to loosen. Instead of I am broken, there is pain. Instead of I must fix myself, there is this is happening. Language changes. Identity softens. And with this softening comes relief. Not the relief of resolution, but the relief of honesty. The mind no longer has to pretend it knows what to do. It is allowed to not know. Not knowing is terrifying to the controlling self, but it is liberating to awareness. The Buddha taught that wisdom begins when the mind admits it does not know. Control depends on certainty. Presence thrives in uncertainty. Modern psychology supports this. Research on acceptance-based therapies shows that people who learn to tolerate uncertainty experience less anxiety and greater emotional stability over time. Why? Because uncertainty is not the enemy. Resistance to uncertainty is. When we sit with what cannot be fixed, we are practicing something rare, unconditional presence. We are not demanding that experience justify itself. We are not asking pain to make sense. We are not turning suffering into a project. We are simply being. This practice reshapes the nervous system. Slowly, the body learns that discomfort is survivable, that emotions rise and fall, that stillness does not equal danger. Buddhism would say we are retraining the mind to trust impermanence. This trust does not come from belief. It comes from observation. We observe that pain changes. We observe that fear peaks and softens. We observe that thoughts are not commands. This observation weakens the illusion of control more effectively than any philosophy ever could, because it is experiential. Sitting with what cannot be fixed also cultivates humility, not humiliation, but realism. We stop positioning ourselves as managers of experience. We become participants. Life is no longer something to be solved. It is something to be lived. Psychologically, this marks a transition from problem-solving mode to being mode. The mind shifts from doing to allowing. This shift is essential for healing trauma, grief, and existential distress. Buddhism would say this is the practice of suchness, experiencing life as it is, without adding or subtracting. But sitting is not easy. Some days it feels unbearable. Some days it feels pointless. Some days the mind rebels violently. This does not mean it is not working. It means the old habits are losing power. The mind that depended on control is uncomfortable without its tools. It will protest. It will bargain. It will criticize. This isn't helping. You're wasting time. You should be doing something. These thoughts are not obstacles. They are signs. Signs that the nervous system is learning a new way of being. The Buddha taught that liberation is not achieved by eliminating thoughts, but by seeing them clearly. When we sit with pain, we also sit with the mind's attempts to escape it. And in seeing these attempts, we begin to understand ourselves, not as broken, but as human. Eventually, something shifts. Not dramatically, not permanently, but noticeably. The pain no longer feels like an emergency. The mind no longer demands immediate resolution. The body begins to soften. This is not the end of suffering. It is the end of panic. And that is a profound beginning. When we can sit with what cannot be fixed, we stop demanding that life conform to our expectations. We stop asking pain to justify itself. We stop measuring worth by comfort. We begin to trust something deeper than control. Presence. This presence does not remove pain, but it removes loneliness, because we're no longer abandoning ourselves in the face of discomfort. We are staying, and in staying, we discover something essential. We were never meant to fix life. We were meant to experience it, fully, honestly, and without armor. The wisdom hidden in this practice will reveal itself next. Not as an idea, but as a transformation. There comes a moment, often long after the collapse, long after the inner war has exhausted itself, when suffering changes its voice. It no longer screams. It begins to teach. This is not because the pain disappears. It may still be present in the body, in memory, in the quiet ache of what was lost. But the relationship to pain has shifted. The urgency is gone. The demand to fix it has softened. And in that space, something unexpected becomes visible. Wisdom, not the kind that comes from books or philosophies. Not the kind that offers answers, but the kind that emerges only when illusions have burned away. Modern psychology calls this post-traumatic growth. Buddhism has spoken of it for centuries, though in different language. Both point to the same truth. Suffering, when met without resistance, can reorganize the mind in ways comfort never could. This does not mean suffering is good. It means suffering is revealing. Before the breakdown, life was lived under assumptions that felt natural, even invisible. Assumptions like, I must control outcomes to be safe. I must understand everything to move forward. I must be strong at all times. These beliefs shaped identity, behavior, and perception. They gave life structure, but also rigidity. The breakdown shattered that structure. At first, it felt like destruction, but slowly, something else became clear. The breakdown did not destroy truth. It destroyed false certainty. Psychologically, this is profound. When core beliefs collapse, the brain becomes more flexible. Old neural pathways weaken. New ones become possible. People begin to question assumptions they once took for granted, not because they're trying to grow, but because they can no longer pretend. Buddhism would say the same. Suffering creates cracks in ignorance. Ignorance, in this sense, does not mean lack of intelligence. It means misunderstanding the nature of reality, believing permanence where there is change, control where there is uncertainty, self where there is process. The breakdown exposes these misunderstandings mercilessly. And yet, if we do not rush to rebuild the old illusions, wisdom begins to emerge naturally. One of the first realizations is humility. Not humiliation, humility. We begin to see that life was never a personal test designed to reward or punish us. It was never evaluating our worth. It was unfolding according to conditions far larger than individual effort. This realization releases an enormous burden. We stop taking randomness personally. We stop reading misfortune as a verdict. We stop believing we failed because things fell apart. Psychology recognizes this shift as a reduction in personalization, a cognitive pattern where people blame themselves for events beyond their control. Letting go of this pattern reduces anxiety and depression significantly. Buddhism frames it more deeply. When the illusion of a central controller dissolves, suffering loses its target. Another form of wisdom emerges quietly: compassion. Not idealized compassion, not moral compassion, but lived compassion. After breakdown, we see others differently. We recognize the fragility beneath their competence, the fear beneath their control, the pain beneath their defenses. Judgment softens, not because we are virtuous, but because we recognize ourselves. Psychology supports this. People who endure and process suffering often develop greater empathy. Their emotional range expands. They become less reactive, less rigid, less quick to assume. Buddhism calls this karu, compassion born from understanding suffering, not from superiority. But perhaps the deepest wisdom hidden in breakdown is this: we were never broken. What broke was the illusion that we needed to be unbreakable. Before the collapse, strength meant endurance. It meant holding on. It meant not needing help. It meant staying functional no matter the cost. After the breakdown, strength is redefined. Strength becomes honesty. Strength becomes vulnerability. Strength becomes the willingness to feel without control. Modern psychology increasingly recognizes this. Emotional resilience is no longer defined as toughness, but as flexibility, the ability to adapt, to recover, to remain open under pressure. Buddhism has always taught this through the image of water. Water does not resist obstacles. It moves around them. It yields, and in yielding, it survives. The breakdown teaches this not conceptually, but experientially. We learn that resistance hardens suffering. We learn that surrender softens it. We learn that control was never strength, it was tension. Another layer of wisdom reveals itself over time: presence. Before, presence was a technique, something to practice. After breakdown, presence becomes necessity. The future no longer feels trustworthy. The past no longer feels stable. Only this moment feels real enough to inhabit. Psychology notes that trauma often forces people into the present moment. Initially, this feels terrifying, but as safety returns, presence becomes grounding. People discover that life, when lived moment by moment, is more manageable than when imagined in its entirety. Buddhism teaches that the present moment is the only place life actually happens. The breakdown strips away distractions and forces us into this truth. We stop living in anticipation. We stop living in regret. We begin living in contact. This contact is not always pleasant, but it is real, and real life, even when painful, feels more honest than controlled illusion. One of the most surprising insights that emerges after breakdown is gratitude, not for the suffering itself, but for what it revealed. We may never say, "I'm glad this happened," but we may say, "I see now what I couldn't see before." We see how exhausted we were. We see how much pressure we carried unnecessarily. We see how conditional our self-worth had become. Psychology calls this meaning-making. Buddhism calls it wisdom arising from suffering. This meaning is not imposed. It emerges. It emerges when we stop asking, "Why did this happen?" and begin asking, "What is this showing me?" Not as a lesson to master, but as a truth to live with. The breakdown teaches us what peace is not. It is not certainty. It is not control. It is not the absence of pain. Peace is the absence of war with reality. This realization changes everything. Life does not become easier, but becomes lighter. We stop gripping so tightly. We stop demanding guarantees. We stop postponing life until conditions improve. This is wisdom, not brilliance, not enlightenment, but grounded clarity. Buddhism would say this is the beginning of awakening, not because we have transcended suffering, but because we have stopped misunderstanding it. Psychology would say this is integration, the moment when pain becomes part of one's story rather than the whole story. The breakdown did not elevate us above humanity. It returned us to it. We now know what breaks us also humbles us. What humbles us softens us. What softens us opens us. This is why life breaks us, not to destroy us, but to free us from the illusions that kept us rigid, fearful, and disconnected. The wisdom hidden in breakdown is not loud. It does not announce itself. It simply changes how we live. We listen more. We judge less. We hold lightly. We trust presence over prediction. And slowly, without effort, we begin to live not as controllers of life, but as participants in it. The next stage is not about understanding more. It is about letting go. Letting go is one of the most misunderstood ideas in human language. People hear the phrase and imagine collapse. They hear it and think of defeat. They hear it and assume it means not caring, not trying, not loving. But letting go is none of these things. In fact, much of the resistance to letting go comes from confusing it with giving up. The controlling mind equates effort with virtue and release with failure. It believes that if we stop gripping, everything will fall apart. Buddhism challenges this assumption at its core. Letting go is not the abandonment of responsibility. It is the release of illusion. Modern psychology arrives at the same place through different paths. Studies on acceptance show that people who practice letting go of internal control over thoughts, emotions, and outcomes actually function better. They are more resilient, more adaptive, and more emotionally stable. Why? Because they're no longer fighting reality. Letting go begins not with action, but with clarity. It starts when we see precisely what we have been holding and why. We have been holding the belief that our worth depends on outcomes. We have been holding the belief that control equals safety. We have been holding the belief that uncertainty is intolerable. Letting go does not ask us to drop effort. It asks us to drop false demands. This distinction is crucial. You can still care deeply without clinging. You can still act wisely without demanding results. You can still love fully without needing guarantees. Buddhism refers to this as non-attachment, not detachment. Detachment implies withdrawal. Non-attachment implies engagement without possession. Psychology mirrors this in the concept of secure attachment. Secure individuals care deeply, but they do not collapse when outcomes change. They trust themselves to cope. Letting go, then, is not emotional distance. It is emotional maturity. The controlling mind protests immediately. If I let go, I'll become lazy. If I let go, I'll stop caring. If I let go, I'll lose everything. These fears are understandable. Control once served a purpose. It helped us survive uncertainty, pain, and unpredictability. But survival strategies are not meant to run our lives forever. Letting go is not an event. It is a practice, and it often begins in very small ways. It begins with letting go of the need to understand everything immediately. It begins with letting go of rehearsing conversations that may never happen. It begins with letting go of blaming ourselves for what we could not prevent. Psychologically, this practice reduces cognitive load. The mind no longer wastes energy on hypothetical futures and imaginary corrections. The nervous system begins to settle. Buddhism would say we are releasing grasping, the mental tightening that creates suffering. But letting go also has boundaries. It is not passivity. Letting go does not mean tolerating harm. It does not mean abandoning values. It does not mean suppressing discernment. This is where many people get confused. Letting go does not mean you stop setting boundaries. It means you stop trying to control how others respond to those boundaries. Letting go does not mean you stop making choices. It means you stop believing those choices can guarantee outcomes. Letting go does not mean you stop loving. It means you stop demanding permanence for what you love. This is the difference between surrender and resignation. Resignation says, nothing matters. Surrender says, I will act without illusion. Psychology refers to this as acceptance with agency. Buddhism calls it right effort. Right effort is not force. It is alignment. When we let go of control, our actions become more responsive and less reactive. We are no longer acting from fear of losing, but from clarity about what is present. This shift feels subtle internally, but it changes everything externally. People often report that after letting go, life becomes paradoxically easier. Not because challenges disappear, but because resistance does. The mind no longer treats uncertainty as a threat. The body no longer braces constantly for impact. The heart no longer closes in anticipation of loss. Letting go also requires grieving. We must grieve the fantasy that life could be secured through effort. We must grieve the identity that promised safety if we just tried harder. We must grieve the version of ourselves that believed control was love. This grief is not weakness. It is honesty. Buddhism recognizes grief as a necessary step in releasing attachment. Psychology confirms that unresolved grief keeps people stuck in old patterns. Letting go is incomplete without mourning what we believed. Once grief is allowed, something else becomes possible. Trust, not blind trust, not naive optimism, but embodied trust. Trust that we can survive uncertainty. Trust that emotions are tolerable. Trust that we can respond even when we cannot predict. This trust does not come from belief systems. It comes from lived experience. Each time we allow an emotion to pass without fixing it, trust grows. Each time we face uncertainty without collapsing, trust grows. Each time life changes and we adapt, trust grows. This is why letting go feels terrifying at first and empowering later. The Buddha taught that liberation is not achieved by controlling the mind, but by understanding it. When we see how clinging creates suffering, letting go becomes natural. Psychology echoes this. Insight reduces compulsion. When a mind sees clearly that control no longer works, it releases it. Not because it is forced to, but because it is no longer necessary. Letting go also reveals something unexpected. Joy. Not the ecstatic joy of achievement, but the quiet joy of ease. The joy of not carrying unnecessary weight. The joy of not rehearsing disasters. The joy of being present without agenda. This joy is subtle. It does not announce itself. It appears in ordinary moments, walking, breathing, listening. Moments that were once overshadowed by planning and worry now feel complete. This is why letting go is not an endpoint. It is a doorway into a different relationship with life, one based on participation rather than domination. We still act, we still care, we still choose, but we no longer demand that life obey. This does not make life smaller. It makes it wider. Letting go is not the loss of control. It is the discovery that control was never what made life meaningful. Meaning was always here, in presence, in responsiveness, in the courage to meet life as it unfolds. And once we see this, holding on becomes unnecessary. Not because we are weak, but because we are finally free enough to release what we never truly owned. Among all the forms of control the human mind clings to, one is especially subtle and deeply rooted. The need to know. We want to know what will happen. We want to know why things happen the way they did. We want to know whether we will be okay. This need often disguises itself as wisdom, planning, or self-awareness. But beneath it lies something more fragile: fear of uncertainty. Modern psychology identifies this as intolerance of uncertainty, the tendency to experience the unknown as threatening. People with a strong need to know struggle not because life is harder for them, but because ambiguity feels unbearable. The mind demands clarity as a condition for peace. Buddhism recognizes this pattern with remarkable precision. The Buddha taught that the mind suffers not because it lacks answers, but because it insists on having them. The demand for certainty becomes another form of clinging, another attempt to secure safety in a world that does not offer guarantees. The need to know often intensifies after loss or breakdown. When control has already failed, the mind seeks refuge in understanding. It believes that if it can just figure things out, it can prevent future pain. So it asks endless questions. Why did this happen? What did I miss? What does this mean about me? What should I do next? At first, these questions feel productive. They give a mind something to do. They create the illusion of forward movement. But slowly, inquiry turns into obsession. The mind circles the same questions repeatedly, never satisfied by the answers it finds. Each explanation leads to another uncertainty. Each conclusion opens a new doubt. This is not curiosity. It is anxiety seeking relief. Psychology shows that excessive rumination keeps the nervous system activated. The brain treats unanswered questions as unresolved threats. As long as something feels unknown, the body remains tense, waiting for danger. Buddhism would say the mind is trying to escape the present moment by retreating into thought. It hopes that understanding will deliver peace. But peace does not come from knowing. It comes from allowing. The Buddha refused to answer certain metaphysical questions, not because they were unimportant, but because he saw that the craving for answers was itself a source of suffering. He compared it to a person wounded by an arrow who refuses treatment until every detail about the arrow is explained. Life does not wait for our understanding. It continues. Releasing the need to know does not mean abandoning reflection or wisdom. It means recognizing when thinking has become a refuge from feeling, when analysis is being used to avoid uncertainty rather than illuminate reality. This distinction is subtle, but transformative. When we no longer demand immediate clarity, the mind begins to soften. We stop interrogating life as if it owes us explanations. We stop postponing peace until answers arrive. Psychologically, this shift reduces cognitive load. The mind is no longer strained by constant problem solving. Emotional energy becomes available for presence, connection, and adaptation. But letting go of the need to know feels dangerous. The mind protests. If I don't understand, I might repeat the same mistakes. If I don't know what's coming, I won't be prepared. If I don't figure this out, I'll lose control again. These fears are understandable. Knowledge has helped us survive. But Buddhism makes an important distinction. Knowing how to respond is not the same as knowing what will happen. Wisdom is not prediction. Wisdom is responsiveness. When we release the demand for certainty, we begin to trust our capacity to meet whatever arises. This trust does not depend on foresight. It depends on presence. Modern psychology calls this self-efficacy, the belief that one can cope with challenges even when outcomes are uncertain. People with high self-efficacy are less anxious not because life is predictable, but because they trust their ability to respond. Buddhism expresses this trust differently. Confidence in impermanence. If everything changes, then no state, pleasant or painful, is permanent. If emotions arise and pass, then fear itself is temporary. If conditions shift endlessly, then the future cannot be fixed, but neither can suffering. This understanding does not come from answers. It comes from observation. We observe that moments of uncertainty did not destroy us. We observe that confusion eventually cleared, even without resolution. We observe that life continued, even when we did not understand it. Slowly, the mind learns that not knowing is survivable, even workable. Releasing the need to know also frees us from false narratives. When we demand explanations, we often accept stories that soothe rather than tell the truth. We assign meaning prematurely. We label experiences as lessons, punishments, or signs, hoping these labels will stabilize the unknown. But forced meaning can become another form of control. Buddhism encourages patience with meaning. It teaches that understanding unfolds in its own time. Some experiences never fully explain themselves, and that does not make them useless. Psychology echoes this insight. Studies on meaning-making show that people who rush to interpret trauma often create rigid beliefs that later limit growth. Those who allow ambiguity tend to develop deeper, more flexible understanding over time. Releasing the need to know is an act of humility. It is the willingness to say, I don't understand this yet, and I may never fully understand it. This humility does not weaken us. It stabilizes us, because it removes the pressure to solve life like a puzzle. Life is not a riddle to be answered. It is a process to be lived. When we stop demanding clarity, something surprising happens. Clarity begins to arrive naturally, not as a complete picture, but as small insights, gentle realizations, subtle shifts in perception. We notice patterns without forcing conclusions. We sense direction without rigid plans. We respond intuitively rather than strategically. Buddhism calls this trusting the path. Psychology calls it intuitive decision-making. Both point to the same phenomenon. When the mind is not overwhelmed by the need to know, it becomes more attuned to what is actually happening. Presence replaces prediction. This presence does not eliminate uncertainty. It changes our relationship to it. Uncertainty becomes space rather than threat. Not knowing becomes openness rather than failure. The future becomes something to meet, not something to conquer. The Buddha taught that liberation does not come from understanding everything, but from ending the struggle against what cannot be known. When the mind stops fighting uncertainty, it discovers peace in the middle of it. This peace is not passive. It is alert, grounded, and responsive. It allows us to act when action is needed, to wait when waiting is wise, to rest when there is nothing to do. Releasing the need to know does not make us careless. It makes us present, and presence, more than knowledge, is what allows us to live well. The mind no longer says, I will be okay when I understand. It begins to say, I am okay meeting this moment. This shift is subtle but irreversible. Once we experience peace without answers, the compulsion to know loosens its grip. We still think, we still reflect, but we no longer believe that certainty is the price of safety. We begin to live without guarantees, not recklessly, but honestly. This is not the end of fear, but it is the end of fear running the mind. And in that freedom, life begins to feel less like a problem to solve, and more like something unfolding moment by moment, asking only that we be present. The next step is even more radical. Not learning how to know, but learning how to trust without knowing. There is a moment, quiet, unremarkable from the outside, when something finally loosens. Not because we decided to let go, not because we achieved clarity, but because holding on simply became unnecessary. This is the freedom of not holding. It does not arrive with fireworks or certainty. It arrives as a subtle release of tension the body has carried for so long that it forgot it was there. A softening in the chest, a deeper breath, a pause between thoughts. For the first time, the mind is not gripping anything. Not an outcome, not an identity, not a future, just this moment. Buddhism teaches that suffering is sustained by grasping, by the continual effort to hold what is unstable as if it were permanent. The mind clings not only to pleasant experiences, but to ideas, roles, and expectations. It believes holding is necessary for survival. Modern psychology echoes this insight through a different lens. Studies on stress and anxiety consistently show that chronic distress is not caused by events alone, but by the mind's attempt to control or resist internal experience. Holding on to certainty, to identity, to emotional safety keeps the nervous system in a state of vigilance. Letting go, then, is not a loss. It is a return to natural functioning. When we stop holding, something remarkable happens. Energy becomes available. The energy once spent monitoring outcomes is freed. The energy once spent rehearsing disasters is released. The energy once spent defending identity is reclaimed. This is why not holding feels like relief. Not dramatic relief, but quiet ease. The Buddha described this state as non-attachment, not indifference, not withdrawal, but freedom from compulsion. The absence of the inner command that says, "You must secure this." Psychologically, this is known as emotional regulation through acceptance. When we allow experiences to come and go without interference, the nervous system recalibrates. The body learns that it does not need to brace constantly. The mind learns that emotions are not emergencies. But the freedom of not holding is deeply counterintuitive. We have been taught that effort creates stability, that vigilance prevents disaster, that letting go invites chaos. So when the mind loosens its grip, fear often arises. If I don't hold this together, who will? If I stop caring so much, will everything fall apart? If I release control, will I disappear? These fears are understandable. Holding once felt like love. It felt like responsibility. It felt like identity. But what we begin to see, through experience rather than belief, is that holding was never what kept life moving. Life was moving anyway. The seasons changed whether we managed them or not. People grew and changed whether we approved or not. Emotions rose and fell whether we intervened or not. Holding did not stop impermanence. It only exhausted us. The freedom of not holding is not passivity. It is responsiveness. When we stop gripping outcomes, we become more attentive to what is actually happening. Instead of forcing, we listen. Instead of anticipating, we observe. Psychology calls this psychological flexibility, the ability to adjust behavior based on present moment conditions rather than rigid rules. Buddhism calls it wisdom. This flexibility is not weakness. It is strength without tension. We still act. We still choose. We still care. But our actions are no longer driven by fear of loss. They arise from clarity. Consider how different it feels to help someone without needing to save them, to love without needing guarantees, to work without tying your worth to results. This is the freedom of not holding. It does not remove responsibility. It removes ownership of outcomes. Buddhism teaches that we are responsible for intention and effort, not results. Results arise from countless conditions beyond our control. When we accept this, a great burden lifts. Psychologically, this shift reduces shame and self-blame. When outcomes are no longer measures of worth, failure loses its power to define us. Mistakes become information rather than verdicts. This is why people often report increased compassion after letting go. Compassion for others, because we see how much they, too, are struggling to hold together a world that will not stay still. Compassion for ourselves, because we stop punishing ourselves for not being omnipotent. The freedom of not holding also transforms our relationship with fear. Fear does not disappear, but it changes. Before, Fear was a signal to tighten control. Now, fear becomes a sensation to be felt. Psychology shows that when fear is allowed without resistance, it often peaks and subsides naturally. The body completes its stress response. The nervous system returns to baseline. Buddhism has always taught this. Emotions are impermanent. They only become permanent when we cling to them or push them away. Not holding allows fear to move. And when fear moves, it loses authority. This does not make us reckless. It makes us honest. We acknowledge fear without obeying it. We feel uncertainty without collapsing. We experience discomfort without fleeing. This honesty is the foundation of true confidence. Not the confidence of certainty, but the confidence of capacity. We begin to trust that we can meet whatever arises, not because we know what will happen, but because we know how to be present. This trust is not intellectual. It is embodied. It comes from repeated experience, moments when we did not hold and life did not destroy us. Moments when we released expectations and something softer emerged. Moments when we stopped forcing and clarity arose on its own. Slowly, the mind learns a new truth. Holding is not safety. Awareness is. The freedom of not holding also reveals something deeply human. Joy. Not the joy of success, not the joy of control, but the joy of ease. The joy of not carrying the weight of the future. The joy of inhabiting the present moment fully. The joy of being enough without effort. This joy is subtle and easily overlooked because it does not announce itself. It appears in simple moments: sunlight through a window, a quiet walk, a conversation without agenda. Buddhism would say this is natural happiness, the happiness that arises when craving subsides. Psychology would say this is well-being grounded in acceptance. Different languages, same experience. The freedom of not holding does not make life predictable. It makes life livable. We stop postponing peace until conditions improve. We stop believing that happiness must be earned through control. We stop waiting for certainty before allowing ourselves to rest. This does not mean life becomes easy. It means we stop making it harder than it already is. The Buddha taught that liberation is not found by adding something new to ourselves, but by removing what was never necessary. Control was one of those unnecessary burdens. When we release it, we do not become empty. We become available. Available to life as it unfolds. Available to respond rather than react. Available to love without possession. The freedom of not holding is not dramatic. It is quiet. It feels like exhaling after holding your breath for years. And once you experience it, even briefly, something in you knows the truth. You were never meant to carry life in your fists. You were meant to meet it with open hands. This openness is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of living awake. The final chapters will show what life looks like when we no longer armor ourselves against uncertainty. When we live not as controllers of experience, but as participants in its unfolding. For most of our lives, we wear armor without realizing it. It is not made of metal or leather. It is made of vigilance, planning, emotional restraint, and self-protection. It is made of control. We call this armor responsibility. We call it maturity. We call it strength. But armor has a cost. It keeps us safe, but also keeps us separate. It shields us from pain, but it dulls sensation. It protects us from loss, but prevents intimacy. When we finally loosen our grip on control, when we stop holding, stop knowing, stop fixing, something unexpected happens. The armor begins to fall away. And without it, life feels dangerously alive. At first, this nakedness feels unbearable. Without armor, every experience seems sharper. Joy feels brighter, but grief feels deeper. Love feels richer, but loss feels closer. We are no longer buffered by distance or preparation. This is why many people retreat back into control the moment vulnerability appears. But if we stay, if we do not rebuild the armor too quickly, we discover something crucial. The armor was never what kept us alive. It was what kept us numb. Modern psychology describes this shift as moving from defensive functioning to authentic functioning. Defensive functioning is driven by fear of rejection, failure, loss, and uncertainty. Authentic functioning arises when those fears are no longer running the system. Buddhism describes the same transition as living without clinging. Without armor, we meet life directly. This does not mean recklessly. It means honestly. Life without armor is life lived in contact. We feel disappointment without collapsing. We feel fear without freezing. We feel love without demanding permanence. This is vulnerability, not as exposure to harm, but as openness to reality. The controlling mind believes vulnerability is weakness because it imagines vulnerability as helplessness. But vulnerability is not the absence of strength. It is the absence of pretense. Psychologically, vulnerability allows emotional processing to complete. When emotions are allowed to move freely, they do not become chronic. They pass. When emotions are suppressed by armor, they stagnate and turn into anxiety, resentment, or numbness. Buddhism has always known this. What is resisted persists. Life without armor means allowing ourselves to be affected. This is terrifying for those who learned early that being affected was dangerous. Perhaps they grew up in environments where emotions were punished or ignored. Perhaps vulnerability led to abandonment or shame. Armor was once necessary, but what once protected us may now imprison us. When the armor falls away, we notice how much effort it took to maintain it. We notice the constant scanning for threats, the emotional calculations before speaking honestly, the tension of trying to appear composed at all times. Without armor, these efforts stop, not because life becomes safe, but because we become resilient. Resilience is not hardness. It is flexibility. A rigid structure breaks under pressure. A flexible one bends. Buddhism teaches this through the image of bamboo. Bamboo survives storms not by resisting the wind, but by moving with it. Control tries to become iron. Letting go becomes bamboo. Life without armor is not passive. It is responsive. We still act. We still set boundaries. We still say no. But our actions are no longer driven by fear of exposure. They are guided by clarity. This clarity comes from being present rather than protected. When we are armored, we are always one step removed, planning, anticipating, guarding. When we are unarmored, we are here with discomfort, here with joy, here with uncertainty. Psychologically, this presence reduces reactivity. When we are not constantly defending ourselves, we have more capacity to choose our responses. We listen better. We react less. We recover faster. Buddhism calls this equanimity, not emotional flatness, but balance in the face of change. Living without armor also transforms relationships. When we are armored, we approach others cautiously. We measure words. We manage impressions. We love with conditions. Without armor, relationships become less strategic and more real. We listen without planning a reply. We share without rehearsing defenses. We love without bargaining. This does not guarantee we will not be hurt. It guarantees we will be alive. The Buddha taught that attachment causes suffering, but he did not teach avoidance. He taught wise engagement. Without armor, we engage fully while knowing nothing lasts. This knowledge does not poison love. It deepens it. When we know that everything is temporary, moments become precious. Conversations become meaningful. Presence becomes sacred. Life without armor teaches us to value experience over security. Psychology confirms this. Studies show that people who accept vulnerability experience deeper connection and greater life satisfaction, even though they may face more emotional risk. Why? Because meaning does not come from protection. It comes from participation. Without armor, failure also changes shape. Failure no longer feels like exposure of inadequacy. It feels like information, feedback, experience. We stop equating mistakes with identity. We stop asking, what does this say about me? And begin asking, what does this show me? This shift reduces shame. Shame thrives on armor because armor implies something to hide. When there is nothing to hide, shame loses its grip. Buddhism teaches that shame dissolves when the illusion of a separate, permanent self dissolves. Without armor, there is less self to defend. There is just life unfolding. Living without armor also changes our relationship with uncertainty. Uncertainty no longer feels like a threat to identity. It becomes a natural condition. We stop needing guarantees to move forward. We act with incomplete information, trusting our ability to adjust. Psychology calls this tolerance for ambiguity. Buddhism calls it trust in impermanence. Both describe the same inner shift, confidence without certainty. This confidence is quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not need validation. It simply allows us to stand in the unknown without fleeing. Life without armor does not make us fearless. It makes fear manageable. We no longer treat fear as a signal to retreat or control. We treat it as information, something to be felt, not obeyed. This changes everything. We take risks aligned with values rather than fear. We speak honestly even when it feels uncomfortable. We choose presence over protection. This is not recklessness. It is courage without armor. The Buddha taught that true freedom arises when we stop trying to secure ourselves against impermanence. Armor is an attempt to do just that, to protect something that cannot be protected. When we stop wearing armor, we do not become careless. We become awake. Awake to the fragility of life. Awake to its beauty. Awake to the fact that safety was never guaranteed, but aliveness always was. Living without armor does not mean life stops hurting. It means pain no longer defines us. It passes through rather than sticking. And in this passing, we discover something profound. We were never meant to be invulnerable. We were meant to be present. The armor falls not because we are strong enough to live without it. It falls because we no longer need it to survive. Life without armor is not about being exposed. It is about being free. Free to feel. Free to respond. Free to love without defense. This is what it means to live awake. Not shielded from life, but open to it. And from this openness, a new way of moving through the world begins to emerge. Not forcing, not controlling, but flowing. The final transformation is not in what we do. It is in how we move with life itself. There comes a stage in the journey where effort changes its texture. We still act. We still choose. We still care. But the force is gone. Life no longer feels like something to push uphill. It begins to feel like something we move with, sometimes slowly, sometimes swiftly, sometimes awkwardly, but always in contact with what is actually happening. This is the difference between forcing and flowing. Forcing comes from fear. Flow comes from trust. For most of our lives, we were taught to force, to push through discomfort, to override intuition, to impose willpower on uncertainty. This mindset is rewarded in many areas of life: work, achievement, survival. But when applied to existence itself, it becomes exhausting. Buddhism calls this wrong effort. Effort driven by craving, aversion, and fear. Psychology describes it as over-control, attempting to manage internal and external experience beyond what is possible or healthy. Flowing, by contrast, is not laziness. It is attunement. It means listening before acting, feeling before deciding, observing before intervening. The Buddha taught the middle way, not as compromise but as alignment. Neither indulgence nor suppression, neither passivity nor aggression. Flowing arises when effort is guided by awareness rather than fear. Psychologically, this state is often referred to as flow or optimal experience, a condition where attention is fully engaged, actions feel natural, and self-conscious effort dissolves. But the flow described here is deeper than performance. It is existential flow. Living without forcing requires a radical shift in how we understand effort. Before, effort was used to secure outcomes. Now, effort is used to meet the moment. This shift is subtle but transformative. We stop trying to make life conform to our plans. We begin responding to life as it unfolds. This does not mean abandoning goals. It means holding them lightly, When we force, we ignore signals. Fatigue becomes weakness. Resistance becomes an obstacle. Emotions become inconveniences. We override the body and silence intuition. Flowing reverses this relationship. Fatigue becomes information. Resistance becomes guidance. Emotion becomes communication. Psychology recognizes this as interoceptive awareness, the ability to sense internal states and use them to guide behavior. People who develop this awareness make better decisions and experience less burnout. Buddhism has always emphasized this through mindfulness of the body and feelings. Awareness is not passive observation, it is intelligence. Flowing with life also changes how we experience time. Forcing is future-oriented. It is always chasing an outcome. The present moment becomes merely a means to an end. Flowing is present-oriented. The present moment becomes sufficient. This does not mean we ignore the future. It means we stop living as if life will begin later, once conditions are perfect. Psychologically, living in constant anticipation fuels anxiety. Buddhism teaches that anxiety arises when the mind leaves the present moment in search of security. Flow brings the mind home. When we flow, we stop asking, "Is this working?" and begin asking, "Is this aligned?" Alignment feels different from success. Success is external and conditional. Alignment is internal and immediate. We can feel aligned even in difficulty. We can feel misaligned even in success. This is one of the most liberating discoveries of the journey. Flowing with life does not guarantee comfort. It guarantees honesty. In alignment, we stop fighting what is. We may still change circumstances. We may still leave situations that harm us. We may still pursue growth. But our actions are no longer fueled by panic. They are fueled by clarity. This clarity allows us to move with less effort and more effectiveness. Not because life becomes simpler, but because resistance no longer drains energy. Psychology refers to this as efficiency of action. Buddhism would say it is right action arising from right understanding. Another profound change occurs in how we relate to obstacles. When forcing, obstacles feel like enemies. They block progress. They trigger frustration and self-criticism. When flowing, obstacles become information. They show us where force is misaligned. They reveal where we are pushing against reality rather than working with it. This does not mean obstacles disappear. It means we stop making them personal. The river does not curse the rock. It flows around it. This metaphor appears repeatedly in Buddhist teachings for a reason. Water is not weak. It is persistent. It adapts. Over time, it reshapes even stone. Flowing with life does not mean we never exert effort. It means we exert effort at the right time, in the right direction, with the right intensity. Psychology calls this self-regulation. Buddhism calls it wisdom. Without flow, effort becomes compulsion. With flow, effort becomes expression. This difference is felt deeply in the body. Forcing tightens the jaw, shoulders, and breath. Flowing softens the body, even while moving. People often describe this state as being carried rather than pushing, not because life becomes easy, but because they stop fighting the current. Flowing also transforms how we relate to uncertainty. When forcing, uncertainty is a threat to be eliminated. When flowing, uncertainty becomes space. Space for creativity, space for intuition, space for emergence. Psychology shows that creativity thrives in uncertainty, not in rigid planning. Buddhism teaches that insight arises when the mind is open, not when it is clenched. Flow creates openness. This openness allows us to respond in ways we could not have planned. Opportunities arise that effort alone could not manufacture. Connections form naturally. Decisions feel simpler, even when circumstances are complex. This is not magic. It is attunement. We're no longer trying to dominate life. We're listening to it. Flowing with life also deepens humility. We recognize that we are not the sole authors of our experience. We participate in a vast network of causes and conditions. This recognition dissolves arrogance and blame simultaneously. Psychology finds that people who accept interdependence experience less shame and less grandiosity. Buddhism calls this seeing dependent origination. Nothing arises alone. When we flow, we stop isolating ourselves as the sole cause of success or failure. We act responsibly without assuming omnipotence. This balance is liberating. We do our part. We release the rest. Flowing does not mean abandoning discernment. It means discerning when to act and when to wait. Sometimes flow requires decisive action. Sometimes it requires patience. Sometimes it requires stillness. Flow is not predictable. It is responsive. This responsiveness brings a quiet confidence. Not the confidence of certainty, but the confidence of adaptability. We trust that when conditions change, we can change with them. We trust that we will know what to do when the time comes. Not because we have planned everything, but because we are present. The Buddha taught that awakening is not about escaping life, but about living in harmony with its nature. Impermanence, uncertainty, and interdependence are not problems to solve. They are the rhythm of existence. When we stop forcing, we hear that rhythm, and we begin to move with it. Flowing with life does not make us passive observers. It makes us skillful participants. We stop asking life to conform to our will. We start aligning our will with life. This is not submission. It is partnership. And in this partnership, effort no longer feels like struggle. It feels like movement, like a river that knows where it is going, not because it has a map, but because it follows gravity. The final chapter brings this journey full circle. It reveals why life breaks us, not to leave us powerless, but to teach us this way of living, a way beyond control, a way rooted in freedom. At the end of this journey, a truth becomes quietly unavoidable. Life did not break us by accident, and it did not break us to punish us. Life broke us to free us. This truth is difficult to accept because it contradicts everything the controlling mind believes. The mind assumes that breaking equals failure, that collapse means weakness, that loss is proof of inadequacy. It interprets pain as something gone wrong. But when we look back, honestly, without romanticizing suffering, we begin to see a pattern. What broke us was not life itself. What broke us was the illusion that life could be controlled. Before the breaking, we lived under silent pressure. We may not have named it, but it was always there. The pressure to manage, to predict, to secure, to be strong enough, careful enough, good enough to keep life from falling apart. That pressure shaped our days. We measured ourselves by outcomes. We postponed peace until certainty arrived. We armored ourselves against loss. And we called this living. Buddhism teaches that suffering does not come from pain alone, but from misunderstanding the nature of existence. We misunderstood impermanence as a threat instead of a truth. We misunderstood uncertainty as danger instead of openness. We misunderstood vulnerability as weakness instead of honesty. So life corrected us, not with cruelty, with clarity. It removed the supports we leaned on that were never meant to carry the weight of existence. It dismantled the structures we mistook for safety. It exposed the exhaustion hidden beneath our competence. The breaking was not a single event. It was a process, a slow erosion of certainty, a gradual collapse of strategies, a quiet failure of control. Each loss, each disappointment, each moment when effort was not enough. These were not random misfortunes. They were invitations. Invitations to see. Modern psychology recognizes this pattern clearly. When people are forced beyond their coping strategies, the psyche reorganizes. Old defenses weaken. New capacities emerge. Not because the person tried to grow, but because the old way could no longer function. Buddhism calls this awakening. Not a sudden enlightenment, but a deep reorientation. A shift from living in resistance to living in alignment. From gripping life to meeting it. Life breaks us because breaking is sometimes the only way to end resistance. As long as control appears to work, we will cling to it. As long as effort seems to guarantee safety, we will exhaust ourselves trying harder. As long as identity remains intact, we will protect it, even at great cost. Breaking interrupts this cycle. It removes the illusion that we are separate from life. It dissolves the belief that we stand above uncertainty. It humbles the ego without humiliating the soul. What emerges after the breaking is not a better version of the old self. It is a different relationship with existence. We stop asking, how do I protect myself from life? We begin asking, how do I live within it? This shift changes everything. We no longer measure worth by success or failure. We no longer interpret pain as personal condemnation. We no longer postpone peace until conditions improve. We begin to live now. This does not mean life becomes painless. It means pain is no longer compounded by resistance. We feel grief without drowning in it. We feel fear without being ruled by it. We feel love without demanding permanence. Psychology would call this emotional integration. Buddhism would call it liberation. Different languages, same freedom. The freedom is not from pain. It is from the illusion that pain should not exist. This is why life breaks us, not to make us smaller, but to return us to reality. Reality is not hostile. It is simply impermanent. And impermanence is not cruelty. It is movement. When we stop fighting movement, we begin to move with life. We stop forcing outcomes. We stop demanding certainty. We stop clinging to identities that cannot survive change. What remains is not emptiness. It is presence. Presence does not need control. Presence does not need guarantees. Presence does not need armor. It meets life moment by moment, with openness rather than strategy. This presence is what the Buddha pointed to when he spoke of freedom. Not freedom from circumstances, but freedom within them. Freedom from the compulsions of fear, grasping, and aversion. Modern psychology confirms this in its own way. People who accept uncertainty, who release excessive control, who tolerate vulnerability. These people report deeper well-being, not because life is kinder to them, but because they are no longer at war with it. Life did not break us to teach us helplessness. It broke us to teach us humility. Humility not as self-diminishment, but as right-sized living. Knowing what we can influence and releasing what we cannot. Acting with care without demanding results. Loving without ownership. This humility is not resignation. It is wisdom. Wisdom says, I will show up fully. I will act with integrity. I will respond with presence. And then I will let life do what it does. This is the end of the illusion of control and the beginning of freedom. Freedom does not look dramatic from the outside. It looks ordinary. Someone breathing deeply. Someone listening without preparing a defense. Someone moving through uncertainty without panic. Freedom feels like ease. Not the ease of comfort, but the ease of honesty. We no longer need to pretend we have everything figured out. We no longer need to be unbreakable. We no longer need to control life to feel safe. We trust something deeper now. Not fate, not certainty, but our capacity to meet life as it unfolds. This trust is quiet and unshakable. It does not promise that things will go well. It promises that we can stay present regardless. The Buddha taught that this is the end of suffering, not the end of pain, but the end of misunderstanding. When we no longer misunderstand life, we stop fighting it. Life did not break us to leave us empty. It broke us to strip away what was false. What remains is not fragile. It is real. And real life, imperfect, uncertain, impermanent, is not something to be controlled. It is something to be lived, with open hands, with an open heart, without armor. This is why life breaks us, so that we may finally stop resisting it and begin to be free.